War Machine is a 2017 American satirical war comedy film written and directed by David Michôd and starring Brad Pitt, Anthony Michael Hall, Anthony Hayes, Topher Grace, Will Poulter, Tilda Swinton, and Ben Kingsley. Based on the nonfiction book The Operators, the wild and terrifying inside story of America's war in Afghanistan by Michael Hastings, it is a fictionalized version of the events in the book based on United States Army General Stanley McChrystal. 2. The film was released on Netflix on May 26, 2017. Plot. In the summer of 2009, four-star General Glenn McMahon, having won renown for his effective leadership in Iraq, is sent to Afghanistan to prepare a strategic assessment so that the government can end the ongoing war. 4. He is given wide latitude to write it, on the sole condition that he not request more troops. McMahon and his staff, particularly his right-hand man Major General Greg Pulver, are united in their belief that the war can be won, and decide to recommend that President Obama authorize a surge of 40,000 additional troops to secure Helmand Province in order to stabilize the country. However, the Secretary of State informs McMahon that, because he requested more troops and such a surge is incompatible with upcoming elections, McMahon's report will not be reviewed until after Afghanistan's presidential election. Captain Badi Basim, a member of the Afghan National Army, joins McMahon's staff as a representative of the Afghan people. He arrives in civilian clothes as he does not wish to wear his uniform, which he has in a bag because of the risk of being killed. Meanwhile, McMahon is informed that due to massive voter fraud in the recent election, a runoff election will have to be held, further delaying the review of the assessment. Fed up, McMahon secretly leaks the assessment to the Washington Post and organizes an interview with 60 Minutes, during which he reveals that, in the last 70 days, he has only been granted one meeting with President Obama. In response, Obama announces that he will send 30,000 troops to Afghanistan, but that all U.S. and coalition forces in the country will leave in 18 months, infuriating McMahon and his staff for telegraphing America's Afghan strategy to the Taliban in Afghanistan. To gather the remaining 10,000 troops needed for a strategy to work, McMahon and his men head to Paris to negotiate with the other coalition nations. In Paris, McMahon learns that the president is in Denmark and wishes to meet with him. The ambassador to Afghanistan warns McMahon that he needs to understand President Obama's position. If McMahon continues to anger the president, he will be fired for insubordination. The president, however, merely shakes McMahon's hand as he climbs aboard Air Force One, supposedly due to time constraints. McMahon and his staff attend a dinner in McMahon's honor, accompanied by Rolling Stone writer Sean Cullen, who intends to write a feature story about his performance for an upcoming issue. The next day, during their wedding anniversary dinner, McMahon's wife Jeannie confronts him about how much time he's been spending fighting abroad instead of being with his family back home. While en route to Berlin with McMahon's staff to continue negotiations, Cullen observes their behavior when out of country and concludes that they are arrogant, seem to care little about the growing public perception that the war is costly and unwinnable, and hold civilian leadership in contempt. At a conference to discuss his strategy, McMahon is confronted by a German official who criticizes the war and McMahon's strategy. Nevertheless, both the Germans and the French agree to furnish the troops needed for McMahon's planned offensive, codenamed Operation Moshtarak, to proceed, with Afghan President Hamid Karzai's approval. The operation launches, but soon runs into trouble when several civilians are accidentally killed. When McMahon holds a public meeting with locals to apologize for the incident and explain that the U.S. is fighting the war for the benefit of Afghans, the crowd grows hostile and a local community leader asks McMahon and his troops politely yet firmly to leave. McMahon later learns that Cullen's article has been published and realizes it paints a negative picture of him and his staff as openly speaking against the president and mishandling the war effort. The president calls McMahon to Washington. Knowing that he will be fired for his actions, McMahon returns to Washington and later takes a job as a civilian consultant. In the aftermath, Cullen ponders the consequences of his article, noting that he wished McMahon's fall would finally convince the government to stop invading foreign countries and end the war in Afghanistan. Instead, the government simply assigns a new general to replace McMahon. Cast. McMahon's entourage. Brad Pitt as General Glenn McMahon, 5. A character based on General Stanley McChrystal. 6. He is portrayed as an accomplished general with degrees from West Point and Yale University. 7. Brought in to bring a resolution to the conflict in Afghanistan. Anthony Hayes. 8. As Lieutenant Commander Pete Duckman, a Navy SEAL and member of McMahon's staff. Emery Cohen. 9. As Sergeant Willie Dunn, General McMahon's body man. R.J. Seiler as USAF Tech Sergeant Andy Moon, Information Technology Support Assistant. 10. Daniel Betts as USN Rear Admiral Simon Ball, McMahon's Senior Public Affairs Officer. Topher Grace as Matt Little, a former lobbyist turned McMahon's civilian media advisor, based loosely on Duncan Boothby. 11. Anthony Michael Hall as Major General Greg Pulver, ISAF Director of Intelligence. 12. Loosely based on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. John Magaro as Colonel Corey Staggart, an Army Ranger and General McMahon's Executive Officer. 13. Ayman Hamdichi as Captain Badi Basim, a scholarly Afghan National Army officer who becomes General McMahon's aide-de-camp. Scoot McNairy. 14. As Sean Cullen, a cynical journalist for Rolling Stone who accompanies McMahon and his staff and acts as narrator throughout the film, loosely based on author Michael Hastings. Meg Tilly as Jeannie McMahon, Glenn McMahon's wife. U.S. diplomats. Sion Thomas as United States Secretary of State Edith May, based on Hillary Rodham Clinton. Alan Ruck as Lieutenant General Pat McKinnon, United States Ambassador to Afghanistan, loosely based on Lieutenant General Carl Eikenberry. Nicholas Jones as Dick Waddle, loosely based on Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan Richard Holbrooke. Griffin Dunn as Ray Canucci, a United States Department of State senior official. Politicians. Ben Kingsley as President Hamid Karzai. 15. Reggie Brown as President Barack Obama. Tilda Swinton as a German politician. Combat Marines. Will Poulter as Sergeant Ricky Ortega, a Marine Corps Infantry Squad Leader. 16. Lakeith Stanfield as Corporal Billy Cole, a disillusioned Marine and member of Ortega's squad. 17. Josh Stewart as Captain Dick North, a Marine Corps officer. Other cast members.